What up, what up, what up, everybody? We are back with another episode of Corporate Counterculture. I am one of your hosts, Bryan Taylor, and then we have,
We have Brian Martins over here.
yes, you got Bryan and Bryan as usual. And today it is the 1st of December, I believe. And we want to talk about reviewing before you reset. So whether you see this today or whether you see this next year at the top of the year or over the Christmas break, let's review before we reset. As salespeople, it's super important. So, Bryan, tell us why it's important to review before you reset.
I guess it starts with everybody's kind of like end of year process, right? If you're in a direct sales role, very, very normal for you to sit down and number one, expect either a new compensation structure, plan, or contract, to a quota that comes along with that new comp plan, and then, a pipeline review, right? Like, how are you going to hit those numbers? And so many times we always expect a bit of a stretch, and understanding kind of where you can go without really understanding where this year went, I think is hard. So the idea here in reviewing before you reset is before you just jump into new goals blindly, you're trying to find out and review this past year what actually worked and what didn't throughout the year. So what worked for you personally, what worked for potentially your territory, your industry, depending on how your organization is split. For us, it's territorially based, geographically based, and so for us, it's really just about, hey, what hit it off this year, what didn't, what did I do personally that worked well, what resonated, and so forth. I mean, I can speak from experience in this sense, and I can say that there were definitely some good hits, there are definitely some misses, there are definitely some lack of planning that caught up to me, and I think that I'll be in a better position next year for sure.
Got it. I like that. I like the honesty. Let's go there. Let's do two points of view. All right, so you've been at a sales org for 2 years or more. So let's do 2 years or more. You're technically 2 years or more. By then, you kind of know what you're doing, at least a little bit, right? Enough
hmm
to understand what's going on. 2 years or more. How would you review and reset? Like, what is that? What is that mindset? What are you using in your tool belt to really understand what next year is going to look like? What language are you telling yourself or speaking amongst others in leadership? How are you approaching it if you are a 2 year, 6 year, 8 year veteran at this sales company? What are you doing?
So that's interesting. So I'm coming up on a year. You're coming up on a year at the place that we're at now,
Yeah.
and I kind of have to dip into my memory bank for what that 3 year span, or even up to an 8 year span, might have looked like. And really, in that world, what would work for me would really just be looking at projects that didn't close, big projects, the ones that have quota shifting potential that didn't close, and understand, hey, is this actually a live deal? Is this still alive for potentially next year? Can I count on, this half a mil or $1 million project or multi-million-dollar project to kind of fulfill a big chunk of my quota for the following year? That's a big one, understanding the
Okay.
ongoing aspect of it. At the same time, it's also understanding the trends and understanding kind of what's going on economically and kind of in the overall market of different industries. In the past world, we've had the company that I was with had huge swings from industry to industry. So one year was huge in food. All our food customers decided go forth and spend and invest and blah blah blah. Other years, food died off, and heavy industry such as like OSB manufacturing, like kind of plywood manufacturing and wood products, really took off just because the market called for that, right? Like tons of construction, and the economy was booming, and builders were needing more wood products and stuff like that. And so that industry would take off.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's legislation with different administrations that come in and out, and that might shift the economy with precious metals or something like that, right? Mining or something. In this world that we're in, very very different. But in this general world that we're in, like, I'm always looking for what's the next thing that's popping up on my feed potentially, right? Like, what's the next product that's being heavily marketed and really starting to pick up steam. And I try to kind of take a deeper dive and understand, okay, how does that affect me and my geographic area of Florida? Sometimes it's driving around and understanding, okay, where are the new developing areas? Where am I seeing warehouses and distribution centers and things like that being built up, and that will kind of dictate, okay, well, this is where I need to focus, and this is where I can see some potential for the following year. In my limited time, though, at this particular place that we're at, in my limited time, I can simply look back and say, okay, of the customers that did hit and did close, what was their overall sales cycle like? Why did it close as quickly as it did? Why did it close when it did? And what was kind of like that catalyst that finally made it happen for the ones that were of a longer sales cycle that I just kind of took over along the way? And that's kind of like how I would generally approach this, kind of 1 year out, 2 years out, and so forth. Understanding the overall trends. What about you?
Got it. Yeah, I agree, man. So, 2 years or more, you were industry expert, but also you're internally a company expert. You know enough to be dangerous. You know enough people in different departments. You have full scope of what salespeople are doing in general in the organization for the most part. If you're dialed in and connected, right? You know who's on plan, who's not on plan, what's doing well, what's selling well, what type of buyers are most interested in our product. So it's a little bit easier to forecast and also speak confidently about any shortcomings or speak confidently about any potential opportunities. So I would say, man, 2 years or more, you really get to choose your own adventure. You get to say, here's what's happening. I know that this, and this happened over the last 3 years. Like you said, legislation or different industry regulations happen, and we're going to be able to penetrate these accounts. Also, you've seen the same buyers and prospects at different trade shows now, so at least you're top of mind. And so even if you don't have a successful book of business, you have a dialed in target sheet, and you can at least reach out, maybe get a meeting, or at least they'll respond to your emails. So I think the reviewing and resetting is a lot easier in that aspect if you make it to year 2 and beyond. Because, 90 days up into 2 years, you're kind of in the hot seat. Let's 100%. Be honest, right? So you make it past 2 years, you can really own your craft and absolutely take shape, and I would say collaborate more so with your boss on what your territory is going to look like that next year. New person, completely different. I think you're almost at the mercy. You are at the mercy of the organization and your leaders. The only thing you can do, I think, to participate in the directions they give you is to show activity, right? So you can say, hey, I made this many calls this year. I was successful with phone calls more than emails, or text messages more than phone calls. This type of role connected with me more. So maybe it's an engineer, even though I'm supposed to be looking for procurement, or maybe it's the marketing people who are getting you in the door more. Maybe you had more success at trade shows than driving around. Maybe driving around was more successful than trade shows. You really get to just say, hey, this is what I did and this is what works. You don't have to say what didn't work. You could just say, this is what I noticed worked for me. You don't have to touch on the rejections or anything like that. You can say, yo, out of all my activities, this is what seemed the most successful. And hopefully that allows them to see that you understand that there's growth that needs to happen, but you're thinking about it in an intelligent way. So I think that is where some sort of intersect or understanding comes from your boss to say, okay, they're taking it serious. They're not just head down and rumbling through everything. Then it makes it a little bit more of a healthier conversation, because the sales plan, when you're not on guarantee or when your bridge is gone, is completely different. Also, that grace that they have for you that first 90 days to a year and a half completely changes. So you technically have to be on defense, and you have to educate yourself about how you've done well or where you've also had shortcomings, so that you could participate in remaining on staff for the next 12 months. So your review and reset almost has to be a performance review of yourself, I think, and then communicating it strategically, managing information skillfully, but strategically communicating your self assessment to help them understand that, just give me time. I'm working on this and I think we can be successful. Bryce Young, football, great example. Carolina Panthers, been there for 2 years, 3 years, 2 years, I think. He got benched last year. This year, he's like, I think they're above 500. I think they're 6-5, 7-5, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that year it is tricky. Just like in sales, it's tricky that first year because everybody's figuring everything out. They brought you into this territory technically because they didn't have it figured out either, right? They made some promises. They didn't fulfill all of the promises. You had some thoughts that you could be successful in. You probably didn't do all of them. Maybe you did 80%. So you're confident. You just have to communicate that you're still the guy. And I think understanding that when you go into those conversations with your boss and coming into that new year of a new sales plan, new comp plan, I think that's super important.
I would agree with that 100%. I would say instead of like offense versus defense in a way, I would just say like don't get caught blindsided in anything.
Yeah.
Like you never want to be quizzed on something and not know, right? Like
Yeah.
I hate just looking like a dumbass, honestly, and just being like, well, this is your territory. You're supposed to know this and blah, blah, blah. And so, what's the emerging industries, the accounts that are kind of popping up in your area, or what's some of the stuff that's dying off? Like, where do you stop, committing time and attention to? Trade shows. What are the trade shows in your territory? Like, I can say if I'm doing a, kind of like yearly review of what went well for me 2025, I hit a lot of trade shows this year. I got some good leads out of them.
Yeah.
I closed very, very close to closing one, maybe two. And then on top of that, like, my network, I can look back and say, hey, I've had some really good conversations with people that I didn't necessarily sell to, but I know I can call on in 12 to 24 months and just be like, hey, what's up? It didn't happen last year in 2025, but is there a chance it might happen in 2026 or 2027? They won't, confidently, I can say that they won't think of me as like a stranger that they've never spoken to or forgotten that they spoke to me before. And so that to me is valuable. But if my leader is coming to me and saying, hey, how did your 2025 go? I need to have that stuff off the top of my head ready to go. I need to have a file that says, like you're saying, like the activity that I did and everything that I closed, didn't close, why not, have explanations for everything. Like if there's anything that you can do as a salesperson in the month of December before the next year starts, is just prepare yourself, because that conversation is going to come. So like to anybody that is in a sales position, everything slows down in the month of December. We all know that. It's Christmas, it's New Year's, all that stuff. But you cannot let your activity slow down also. Like this is also cleaning up CRM and cleaning up, kind of like your prospecting targets and things like that. It's doing a lot of like this like housekeeping and file management and all this other stuff. And like maybe even digging into some of the long-term projects that you didn't necessarily get to, but you might have had in the back of your mind, like certain templates, like templates in the sense of like proposal templates or PowerPoint slide deck templates and things like that you wanted to get to, or you wanted to kind of pretty up or something like that. And it didn't necessarily go that way. And I think that you have to really double down in the month of December, to your point of staying relevant, right? Like here we are, coming up on your 12-month mark. You need to show me that you're either getting up to speed or at speed. And how do you do that?
Yeah, man. It's luckily it's December, right? That's what December's for, like you said. So what do you say? What's a good place to start when doing that? Like, where do you say, all right, it's December, I know all these things need to be done. What's the first thing you start with?
Okay, I like to start planning for the following year. So I like to get that out of the way early. For me personally, I like to just look at straight up any travel, any scheduled events company wide. For us, it's, sales meeting in January. It's a couple of quarterly team meetings and then trade shows. Those are the top three things that I already like to jump into my calendar and say, okay, I know that I need to be here, here, and here. And then I come in and say, okay, do I have my birthday, my wife's birthday, whatever else, long weekend kind of extensions, whether if it's like, a 4th of July on a Friday and, I'm taking Monday off or whatever. I like to kind of get those days in way in advance. And then it always looks better if you're like, you had the day off and then you decided to come in and do some emails or something like that, as
Yeah,
opposed to
true.
like, oh, you're supposed to be here. Where are you? You know what I mean? So I try to do that and kind of get ahead of the year and kind of look at this just broad strokes where I plan to be and so forth. Then I like to do a target list of who did I try to hit in 2025? Why didn't I get to them? Is it worth keeping them on my target list for 2026? And it's not necessarily like, let me just build a new list from scratch. It's let me build off of last year's list, see if it's still valid, see if I need to make adjustments. Because you never just want to be building things up from scratch for no reason. You already committed time to that list initially. Let's just make sure that you're in the same train of thought. You understand where things changed along the way, maybe.
Yeah.
And then I like to look at my performance. Where did I mess up? Where could I have done better? You know, me personally, there were probably a couple months throughout the year where there was a lot going on inside of my house specifically, where like I wasn't as productive as I could have been because I'm a type of person that I have to have the multiple screens and I have to have my office and I have to have all this stuff. And so for me, my productivity takes a deep dive, like it just freaking nosedives. But I understand that for the following year, that's not going to happen. Granted, now the following year, there's going to be a baby and that's going to be a whole new set of struggles
Yeah.
there. But I like to understand, okay, why didn't I hit my initial targets? And then I like to look at, what closed, why was I successful, and really, do I need to double down on that? Is there anything within my toolbox that needs to be sharpened? Are there any trainings, that type of thing? So it's like a huge overall plan, and it takes a good amount of time, where it's not like, oh, I'm just going to sit down in a day and I'm going to go through this. It's, hey, let me spend an hour today, an hour tomorrow, and so forth, and kind of take it one chapter at a time. And once the month of December is over, you're like, okay, I built a good analysis of 2025, a good plan for 2026, and I have a very, very strong place to start from when I finally sit down with my leader and I say, hey, this is what I'm going to hit. This is what I'm going to strive towards. These
Mm-hmm.
are realistic targets for me. Are we on the same page? And you do the analysis first. Then you almost compare notes with your leader, because it also helps for you to show that you're also, introspective and you're looking at yourself critically the same way that your leader might.
Yeah. I like that. I like that. I think that shows foresight, right? And then especially if you get the days out. I like the planning the off days because that's an easy win with your boss. Like y'all can collaborate and get that out the way because your boss is probably still dealing with their boss on what the sales plan is going to be or
Mm-hmm.
activities anyway. So they probably don't have the full scope of what they need to communicate to you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get the, hey, these are my off days, I'm being proactive, and then also your target list, those are like two big wins because those are things they can actually have input and give you concrete answers or suggestions on. Everything else, I've been at multiple organizations. In every sales department, you don't get the quota number until you're in the year.
Yeah, it's like halfway through January. It's like, oh, by the
Yeah,
way, this is how much you should have sold already.
yeah, you're in January, February, and they're saying, hey, here's your quota for the year.
Yeah.
So just knowing that, you can take your time with that. But if you show that you're working through and thinking through something as far as a target list, I think that's super important because that's what I plan on doing too. The same thing, especially with the target list, because man, it's so important to even understand who you're going after and why.
Yes,
And
understanding why. Like you're not just literally throwing a dart at a map and just driving around wasting freaking time and money.
yeah, how many people, not people, but how many companies do you put on your target list?
You want to have at least 10.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you surpass 25, it's just like there's no real meaning to it, because you also have to remember, like, maybe you break it down into something that makes sense, right? So maybe you break it down into, hey, I want to make contact with 2 per month. And
Yeah.
this is 2 new accounts that nobody has ever touched every month. There you go. That's new contacts that I'm making. It's new, people that I'm networking with. It's new opportunities that might be coming up. But that's a solid, realistic number. I think you undershoot and over deliver, as opposed to overshoot and under deliver, which looks way worse.
Yeah.
You also have to factor in there as a salesperson and as somebody that's going to be out doing trade shows and in your territory and on vacation and all this other stuff. You have to factor in the day-to-day hustle and bustle too. Sometimes the week just gets away from you. Like you're going from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting,
For
you're
sure.
going from flight to appointment to flight to rental car, like all this stuff. And then, all of a sudden you haven't sat down in front of your computer for 3 days. And so,
Dude.
your prospecting takes a hit. And again, if you have this unrealistic, massive balloon of a number, then you have nothing to actually show in terms of like chipping away at that. But if you can get to halfway through the year and you're at 45% instead of 50, okay, you're close. But if you're halfway through the year and you're at 10% instead of 50, that's a big difference there. I try to shoot for that like 10 to 25, and I think that's a realistic number for sure.
Yeah. So we're on the same page because I usually say 30, but
Mhm.
I break them down into, I guess, trimesters. So I do 3.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
10, technically for me, it's 10 per trimester. So that gives
Mhm.
me, I usually try to do 10 targets, 4 or 5 that I really want to go after,
Mhm.
and then 5 that also make sense. And the reason why I do it that way is because, like you said, we're driving around. So it makes sense to have more than one location that I could potentially go to if I'm in an area. Because sometimes I've driven to an area and it's Fort Knox. You can't even get into the building to go to
All
the
the
front
time.
door to talk to
Yep.
the receptionist or pop. You can't even pop in the warehouse because there's a gate. So I try to say, hey, if I'm going to drive an hour out, let me at least have 2 or 3 that I could potentially see. So I break those up into those 3 segments, like those 3 regions technically, like whatever 3
Mhm.
areas I'm gonna go to.
Mhm.
I have at least 2 or 3 per area, and then I'm still playing with what's the sweet spot on numbers, but I try to have 1 to 3 contacts per company. So it's
Mhm.
technically anywhere from like 15 to 30 contacts. And the reason I say that is I really only focus on probably 1 or 2 per company. But sometimes you're on a plane, and if I can get everybody at least added to LinkedIn or a message
Mhm.
or something, when I'm sitting there, I can say, hey, I know I just contacted this company last week. This other company that's ranked number 9 for me, I could technically just send them a message right now. And
Yeah.
maybe it's a warehouse guy, or maybe it's not the direct decision maker, but maybe I can get on somebody's radar who passes me off. Shoot a quick message, informal, whatever. And I just do that for 2 to 4 months. And sometimes people disqualify themselves or I disqualify them, but I don't add another thing. I try
Yeah.
to get down on that list as much as possible, because if you don't, I've had this happen where I've reported on some of my targets and my boss has said, oh, well, did you send them an offer? And I was like, why would I do that? I haven't had a discovery call or anything. And he's like, well, sometimes a Hail Mary works. And it's like, okay. And which is, that's neither here or there, but what that taught me a few years ago was to, all right, try everything so that if that type of comment comes up, I could say, dude, I reached out about 15 times. I even called the warehouse guy, this and that. It's not really a fit. Or I haven't heard from anybody.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
I usually, after hearing that it was like 5 years ago actually, but after hearing that, I was like, okay, now just make sure I go through whatever I can. Some people get an email, some people get a PDF, some people get a link to whatever, but I've tried every angle. So I try to do that every 4 months, and that way I can somewhat feel confident. So yeah, but 10 is my sweet spot, man. If I could really just stay on 10, and then if you disqualify yourself, I'm down to 7. And then if I disqualify, I'm down to like 5. I'll just stick with those 5, especially for what we do for the next month and a half, 2 months. And then
Yeah.
because hopefully you get leads from marketing. Hopefully you get some leads at a trade show. So
Right.
this is merely the manual work of us extra, like, or on
Right.
top of what's supposed to be going on at the company's branding and awareness and all that type of stuff. This is us actually reaching out, also putting in, like you said, time traveling and driving and stuff like that. We don't have the sales job where you could just sit and make 60 calls, because we're not
No.
we're not at the office or in at our desk like that every day. We have to do site visits. We have to physically
Yes.
go out. So for us, it's a pretty good number to pursue on top of everything else we do.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. And you know, like you said, it's you can essentially work your way and whittle down to like potentially even like the whale, right? Like, hey, I was able to really fine tune this list, really filter out the ones that aren't good fits, but it wasn't for lack of trying.
Yeah.
And that's worthwhile for next year. Next year, hey, what's your list looking like? Well, I know that these 6 accounts I don't need to waste my time with anymore. So all that makes total sense, and it really just depends on the type of kind of organization that you're in. But I think the moral of the story for today's episode is what is just look at the year yourself, do your homework yourself,
Yeah.
and when you sit down with your leader, you're the one that's bringing a lot of this information to the table. You're not having to answer questions and being, getting caught flat-footed and on the looking like a dumbass at the end of the day. Like you're the one that's
Yeah,
prepared,
dude.
you're the one that's planning, you're the one that's looking ahead to the next year, and you're the one that's excited and energetic about going out there and closing more deals.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. You're here in sales to make money, so you want to show them that you're interested in doing that.
100%. 100%, man. At the end of the day, that's all you're here for. That's all they want you there. That's all they want you there for, and that's what
Yeah.
they're paying you for.
That's what they're paying you for.
That's what it
All
is,
right.
man.
Yeah. So if you were thinking about reviewing and reset, you're going into your next year. Remember, get your target list together, get your scheduling together, and then be able to communicate to your boss what you did and what you're going to do. If you have any other suggestions or thoughts, likes, comments, leave them under the video and connect with us on the next one.
All right, peace.
Peace.